Hi friends! A couple weeks ago, we talked about how to help goats thrive in winter. And right after that, a good portion of the United States started experiencing extreme cold temperatures for their typical climate. So today, I want to talk specifically about how to support your livestock during extreme cold when you and your animals are not accustomed or adapted to it. Let's dive in. Hey friends! Welcome to the Get Goatwise podcast. Are you longing to raise goats and other animals for food but don't know where to start? Do you want to be more self-sufficient and less dependent on the grocery store? Do you wish you had a mentor to walk you through raising livestock? Hi, I'm Millie, animal scientist, cattle girl turned goat rancher, co-owner of Dry Creek Livestock, and simple living enthusiast. For 15 years, I've been on a mission to raise all of our own meat, eggs, and dairy. Here, we'll talk about raising goats and other homestead livestock, how to create sustainable animal management systems that actually work, and a bit of off-grid life with kids and livestock. If you're ready to take control of your food supply, raise livestock with confidence, and provide your family with the most nourishing meat, eggs, and dairy available, you're in the right place. Kick off your muck boots, pour a cup of coffee, and let's talk livestock. Hey there! Do you want to hang out with like-minded folks who are also interested in raising their own livestock and seeking self-sufficiency? Inside the free Raising Goats and Homestead Livestock community, you'll get tips on raising goats and other livestock and ideas to increase your self-sufficiency. Join now at bit.ly/getgoatwisecommunity. You can also become an insider and get weekly emails from me with the latest podcast episode, tips on raising goats and other livestock, real-life information about self-sufficiency and living off-grid, and early bird access to special offers. Sign up at bit.ly/getgoatwiseinsider. Here's what's happening on the ranch. We have one more week of the first heat breeding season, which is 4 weeks long. I know a heat's only 3 weeks. We do 4, and then we'll swap out bucks. It's almost time to blood test the dairy does for pregnancy and biosecurity. We do that 30 days after we take the buck out. We've had a couple nights of minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and those days stayed in the single digits. But we were on the edge of the extreme cold everyone else has been experiencing. Just 35 miles northwest of us, Peter Sinks dropped to minus 53, and during cold snaps, our temps are usually just a little warmer than Peter Sinks, so we feel pretty fortunate this time around. Let's talk about extreme cold. The definition of extreme cold varies by location, and the definition isn't very precise, except that it means that temperatures and wind chills could be fatal. It's different for people who don't experience really cold temps on a regular basis. Though we do have some problems when the cold gets extreme, even though we're used to cold. For the most part, our animals are adapted to cold and their bodies are prepared for it. And we are used to caring for animals in below freezing temperatures. But it is still not fun. Add in the wind chill, and I sometimes question my life choices. We don't get out of it unscathed, though. We see some frostbite, especially on young goats that have pendulous ears, like boars, and on the combs of chickens. However, if you and your animals are not used to cold, it can be devastating. Here are some tips to help you get through the cold snap. First of all, let's talk about shelter, windbreaks, and bedding. A shelter and/or a windbreak is necessary for the livestock if the wind is blowing, or if there's a blizzard going on. Wind chill can be brutal. When the ambient temperature drops below zero, even a breeze makes a huge difference in the feels like temperature. If you don't have a shelter or windbreak, you can lean up and tie pallets or stretch a tarp along a fence for a windbreak. Put down a lot of bedding. Livestock are very good at settling into deep bedding and insulating themselves against the cold. We find that straw is best in this case, but use what you have or can get. Extra hay or shavings, and in the case of shavings, larger flake shavings work better for this purpose. There are risks of piling and other problems with shelters during extreme cold, and I talked about that a lot in episode 40. I'll link that in the show notes. Humidity. Humidity is your enemy during cold weather. It accelerates frostbite. If your animals are in a shelter, they will generate a lot of moisture themselves, so make sure it is well ventilated so the humidity can escape. Your bedding will play a critical role in managing humidity. Use a lot to absorb moisture and pull it away from direct contact with the animals. Specifically for chickens, reduce humidity in the coop. Same thing, ventilation, lots of bedding. We don't want a breeze blowing on the chickens though when they're roosting especially. Keep the water outside the coop and give them warm water a couple times a day. I know I've said before that you shouldn't use heat lamps with chickens, and I stand by that in most cases. This is my exception. If you have extreme cold coming and your birds are not adapted to cold, you may want to consider a heat lamp for a few days to get them through. If you've done all the other things, bedding, managing humidity, you can watch the chickens and see how they're doing before adding a heat lamp. Be overly cautious and safe with a heat lamp. The last thing you want right now is a fire. Don't make heat lamps a regular thing, and I still say avoid it if you can. Now let's talk about ruminants, cattle, goats, sheep. They generate heat of digestion. It's generated by the rumen. It's basically a giant furnace. So you can stimulate that to produce more heat by feeding extra roughage. If you're feeding a high-protein hay like alfalfa, feeding more alfalfa doesn't help increase heat of digestion. You need to feed a lower-protein hay like grass hay or even straw as a supplement to the alfalfa they're already getting. I have heard that goats will overeat straw, though. I've never seen it myself, so you'll want to watch them if you feed them straw as additional forage. The extra forage is going to create more digestion happening in the rumen, which will generate more heat. Those coarser forages take more microbial action to digest, so that, again, generates more heat. Water. Breaking ice on water is better than nothing. They need water even when it's freezing cold. A better option is to give less water several times a day so it doesn't have the chance to freeze solid. In most locations, water out of the hose is going to be a lot warmer than water under broken ice in a trough. Be aware that plastic can get brittle in bitter cold temperatures, so it's easier to crack and break buckets and troughs while trying to remove ice. You definitely don't need broken stuff while you're trying to manage everything else in this situation. Should you heat water? Not necessarily, though I have experimented with that before we moved off-grid, and it's an option. When we had goats kid in the winter and the temps dropped to -20 or so Fahrenheit, I would haul warm water out to the does in the evenings so they could get a good drink before bedding down. Why? Lactating does need a lot of water, and when the water is right at freezing temperature, they don't want to drink much and lower their rumen temperature. So often they won't drink enough water to stay hydrated and support lactation. The commercial meat goats don't get that kind of pampering, but they also don't kid in January here. If you think that your animals are not drinking enough during the cold snap, try giving them access to warm water once a day. This really only applies to animals that are not acclimated to the cold. Access to sunshine. I've been watching cattle for decades, and when it's really cold, as soon as the sun comes up, they stand broadside to the sun, and it's usually the left side. I've never seen any research on this, but I think they do it to warm their rumen contents after drinking very cold water or just experiencing a very cold night. Again, if it's cloudy or your animals are inside during the daytime, you may want to consider warm water once a day if they cannot get sunshine to help themselves warm up. If you have a goat down in the cold and you're sure it's because of cold, your first option obviously is to get to a vet. I'll always tell you that. But what I've done successfully, and do this at your own risk, is tube them with hot coffee. I've done 5 cc's for young kids and about 40 cc's for does. It warms them up, and the caffeine gives them a reason to get up and stay alive. We had a yearling doe that I was sure would die. She was down in the cold, shaking. My daughter tried to get her up. And as a last-ditch effort, I tubed her with coffee. That was a few years ago, and we still have her. I'll post the video of her in the group when she was down, if the Facebook police will let me. I'll warn you, it's a little disturbing to watch. You can see her shaking and the frost on her, and you can also see a big part of the problem, which was the shelter that had a floor, and how it affects their hair coat and thus their ability to insulate themselves. Anyway, it was a happy ending. She fully recovered and is a productive part of our herd. If you have babies, you can consider coats, blankets, or sweaters. Make sure the coat or blanket doesn't reduce their natural ability to stay warm by flattening their hair coat down against their body. So you don't want anything that's tight, really tight fitting. You want there to be insulative layers. So you want it to kind of float on top of their hair to add to their insulation, not replace what they already have. Ear protection. I've seen earmuffs for calves, but I've never used them. So that's something to look into if you have calves. As far as goats with pendulous ears, like boars and Nubians, you can tape their ears to their neck or their head. I've used duct tape to tape the bottom of their ears, under their chin, or to their neck to prevent frostbite. It just keeps that skin of their ears in contact with their other skin, so it can't freeze. This is another time when you can consider heat lamps, just like with the chickens, but only as a short-term last resort, and use every bit of caution to make sure you don't end up with a fire. And how about you? Make sure and take care of yourself while you're taking care of your livestock. Wear layers, cover your ears, and go inside regularly to warm up. I hope this helps you get through extreme cold with all your animals alive and healthy. I know it's hard, and it's so much harder if you don't have to do it all the time. So I'm cheering for you and praying you all make it through unharmed with some new experience in your toolbox of skills. If you have any comments or questions, come on over to the community and start a conversation. Hey there, thanks for listening today. I'm so glad you're here. If this episode helped you or encouraged you in some way, share the link with your homesteading friends. And if you really want to help me out, click on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and a review. You can connect with me on Instagram or email linked in the show notes, and meet me back here soon for more Get Goat Wise.